The event is sort of about like how in the process, or since the Iraq War, the US and the United Kingdom have also changed, or they have changed with the war. And 15 years is a lot of time for, these major shifts in society to show up. So this event looks at how the security state has changed in the US, how immigrants are treated differently, how Muslims are treated differently, but also what is happening on the ground in Iraq today, and what is life like there, and how is it different than it used to be. I think it's also important just to talk about kind of like where the focus of the war on terror is. We want to shift the focus on the war on terror to the forgotten places that we don't read about as often, but that are directly devastated by US foreign policy. And we also want to show how living in empire doesn't really put you at such a remove from these places. Iraq is just one of many of these places. The writer Arun Kanani wrote, "Colonial history teaches us that violence always comes home in some form, whether as refugees seeking sanctuary, whether as the re-importing of authoritarian practices first practiced in colonial settings, or indeed as terrorism." So I think that's where we'll start tonight. We can talk more about the legacy of the war kind of through the readings that we'll have here tonight, and through the conversation. Another writer who I wish could be here tonight is the Iraqi writer Sinan Antoon, who's traveling. But he, a few weeks ago, wrote this really wonderful op-ed in the New York Times just about being an Iraqi writer. And I just wanted to read a little bit of it because I think it kind of explains also, what we're trying to talk about tonight. So he wrote, "The invasion of Iraq is often spoken of in the United States as a blunder or even a colossal mistake. It was a crime. Those who perpetrated it are still at large. Some of them have even been rehabilitated thanks to the horrors of Trumpism and a mostly amnesiac citizenry. A year ago, I watched Mr. Bush on the Ellen DeGeneres show, dancing and talking about his paintings. The pundits and experts who sold us the war still go on doing what they do. I never thought that Iraq could ever be worse than it was during Saddam's reign, but this is what America's war achieved and bequeathed to the Iraqis." Our first presenter tonight is Wafaa Bilal. Wafaa is an Iraqi-born political artist and the author of Shoot in Iraqi, Art, Life, and Resistance Under the Gun. Bilal's work is constantly informed by the experience of fleeing his homeland and existing simultaneously in the comfort zone of the US and his consciousness of the conflict zone in Iraq. His performances and interactive works have included an installation of blank books to crowdsource funding to replace destroyed books in Baghdad, among many others. Based in New York, Bilal's an associate arts professor at NYU's Tisch School for the Arts. And we're really lucky tonight to have him present his work to us and show him his performance art that actually inspired the book. So I think the art came first and then the book, right? All right, so I'm really pleased to introduce Wafaa Bilal. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for the introduction. You mentioned Al-Mutanabbi Street as a college student. That was our playground. And not only that, and it was a black market for us and as an intellect to go and deal with the bookseller to get us the prohibited books by Saddam. I wanted to start by thanking the Asian American Writers Workshop, Ken, Sophia, also Tiffany and Rob for a great gathering here tonight. Also, I wanted to thank my collaborator and co-writer, Carrie Liderson, who is visiting us from Chicago. And honestly, without her, this book would not be possible. So thank you so much. Today I'm gonna present a short presentation about Shoot in Iraqi project, also called Domestic Tension, which is a performance project I did in Chicago in response to Iraq war. And after that, I'll read just a small section from the book. We could dim the light if possible. There you go, that's better. My experience between toward has been mediated by the conflict and the comfort. I remain linked to the tragedy of the past, blanketed in disaster, and the present, where my geographical position allows such a thing to be somewhat less immediate. Within my past and the present histories, I create work that engage the space occupied between longing and destruction. I avoid translating the conflict. Instead, I initiate dynamic platform to generate an active history. This approach encourages the participant to become creators from passive viewers. By reflecting back society back on itself, my role evolve into an invisible mirror, a trigger of a platform. On May 4th, 2007, I entered Flat File Galleries for a project called Domestic Tension, also known as Shooting Iraqi. For 1 month, I lived in a makeshift room set up in the gallery where I went about my daily routine with mechanized paintball gun aimed at me. Visitor to the gallery and the website could control web camera enabled gun with web interface to aim and shoot at me 24 hours a day for the duration of the project. Shooting Iraqi was intended to be provocative commentary on the nature of the modern technological warfare. In early 2007, I saw a TV interview with a young female American soldier whose mission was to drop bombs remotely on Iraqi targets from her computer console in Colorado with no physical or psychological connection to the target. While pressing buttons from thousands of miles away, sitting in a comfortable chair in the front of the computer, the soldier was completely oblivious to the terror and the destruction that was caused to an individual, a family, a whole community from halfway across the world. My brother, Haji, was killed by an American air-ground missile. It struck me that Haji's death could be orchestrated by someone just like the young American soldier at the computer console in Colorado. I conceived the project Shooting Iraqi shortly after that TV interview with the American soldier as a result of dealing with my grief over the death of my brother in our hometown, Kufa, Iraq in 2004. The project emerged from an intense need to connect my life in the comfort zone of United States to the terror and the sorrow of the conflict zone in Iraq, where my family and so many others live out their daily lives. Shooting Iraqi also meant to highlight the dehumanizing effect on the citizens of United States who have been mostly shielded from the actual horrors of their government campaign in Iraq. Our lives go on without a care in the face of devastation and destructions being carried in our own name. With these concepts in mind, I wanted to impose to the viewer and the participant what it would be like if you had actually faced down an attempt to kill your Iraqi target. What kind of personal ethical crisis that may provoke. I was posing these questions not only to incite, but also as an attempt to humanize the conflict. I did not want to create a project that sheltered or conditioned by the aura of the gallery, nor I did want to do a street protest that would alienate people more than engage them. I wanted a project that would enter people's homes and workspaces reach them in their own comfort zone. During the project, I have this duality between connecting and disconnecting people. I disconnected people by streaming my daily life for 30 days with grainy images and void of any audio. But at the same time, I would record 10 minutes of my daily life and post it on the internet, on YouTube, to give people a glimpse of the emotional roller coaster I was in during the project. Many stories have taken place there, but there are one that stands out. One of them is day 14, where in that day I was shot about 20,000 times by internet visitors. It is worth to note many hackers have hacked the gun to turn it to an automatic and shoot and track me. But this time I contacted the one person who become kind of a guardian angel, Jason, and I thought this possibly could be a hack and somebody turning the gun into an automatic. And Jason said, no, this is good news and bad news. The good news is you reach the maximum viewers on the internet, and then it went to dig.com as the top site. But he said the bad news is prepare yourself for a storm. And indeed, it was a storm. Can we play the next video?
Okay, everybody, it's day 14. This has been insane because what happened is it was hit dig.com and the place has been completely bombarded non-stop for the last 2-3 hours, and you could see it's absolutely trapped so much. I mean, to the point you cannot, not a single second. I cannot even keep filling the spot here. Dig.com. This is really disturbing. This is non-stop. I cannot keep track of this. I cannot fill these paintball fast enough to keep with the demand. Okay, I'll let you go because I think I cannot do the camera and cannot do display. So I'll just have to run back and forth. See, I have to run back and forth between see, now I'm taking hit. I'm taking hit for them. There you go. See, I mean, just it's absolutely non-stop, and this is so disturbing right now. Okay, I gonna go in a safer place. Very disturbing, but I guess I set up the situation. I cannot give up right now, and I won't give up. All right, gonna go and fill it back. See this one. Very disturbing, very hard, very disturbing.
So many stories like this emerge during the 30 days. But on the last day, and you will see from the next video, I emerge as a different person. And it has everything to do with I dealt for the first time with my losses. And it has to do with my faith in art has been restored, and my faith in people coming together collectively to voice their opinion has been restored as well. Let's play the next one.
Hi everybody, it's day 30th. The gun is very busy right now. I don't have any script written, but I have a lot of people online who are trying to shoot, and as you can know, there is not even a single second between these shots right now. It's very busy right here, and I think, I don't know why the traffic all of a sudden, but it might have to do with the last day of shooting. But I am going to extend this to one more day. So instead of ending it on day 30th, I am going to end it tomorrow, which is 31 days. And this is dedicated, the extra day is dedicated to the people who doubted I will go through this. So to the supporter, thank you very much. You've been great in this journey. It has been very hard journey, ups and downs. It united people, it divided people, but that's what are supposed to do. It's supposed to inform, it's supposed to agitate, and it's supposed to be part of life. So thanks everybody for your great support. And one more thing, I have no resentment to the people who shot. It's an encounter, it's not a didactic piece, and it's an open narrative one. We could all impose our own narrative on it. So to end this, I am in great spirits. The energy is great. There is, of course, there is a mental and physical impact, but that I could deal with that after 5 o'clock tomorrow. I hope to see some of you when I walk out of the gallery. Otherwise, I would love to see everybody on the 16th of June when we take this place down. So either I see you tomorrow or I will see you on the 16th. Thank you again, and it has been a great journey. Bye for now.
Read a very short section, and that will be it for me. I never would have begged a Tom Hanks character to be my alter ego. But watching the movie Castaway a few months after leaving the gallery, I was chilled to see the parallels between his character, a FedEx executive standard on a tropical island after a plane crash, and in me in my paintball gallery. Tom's character became so desperate for companionship that he developed a deep friendship with the volleyball that also survived the crash. He painted a face on the ball with his own blood, attached a shock of a dry grass as a hair, and calls it Wilson, after the brand name on the ball. He argues constantly with Wilson in an inscrutable one-way dialogue. When he lost Wilson after losing, tossing him away in a fit of rage, he is devastated. I felt as though I were watching my relationship with the gun. I despise it, I curse it. I never want to see it or hear it again. But in that situation of isolation and stress, it was my only steady companion, constantly alive and in motion. When it was silent, I felt lonely and abandoned. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Wafaa. That was amazing. So this is the first half of the Iraq part of the event. And then the second is Erin Banco, who's a journalist, who'll be reading from her new book, Pipe Dreams, from Columbia Global Reports. I really like this book because it really focuses, I think when we think about the Iraq War, we also forget that a major selling point was that it was supposed to help Iraqi people. You know, we were saying that the US would help like make better of the oil fields and then distribute the oil resources better to the people, which has not been the case. But this book is incredible in that it really just returns to like, well, has that happened or not? You know, what has happened since then when like where is the oil money gone? And just read. And this book has rightly gotten a lot of praise. I just wanted to read some short pieces that I liked. The Washington Post Loveday Morris called Pipe Dreams a fascinating and revealing dive into the murky world of oil contracts, which, trust me, is very difficult to understand. And Lauren Bond of Foreign Policy Interrupted praised it for telling us the woefully untold story of theft in Iraq. Banco is an investigative reporter at the Star-Ledger in New Jersey. She's a former fellow at the New York Times and was the Middle East correspondent for the International Business Times. She's covered the Middle East for years, and she's currently working on investigative journalism on the government surveillance of veterans. I'm really pleased to welcome Erin. Thank you so much.
Hi, guys. Thanks, Sophia. And thanks to everyone for coming today. It's a great turnout. And thank you to the Asian American Writers Workshop for hosting this really important event. It's great to be here. So yeah, my book is Pipe Dreams. It came out in January, but before I get into reading some bits of the book, some anecdotes from people on the ground, I'd like to just talk a little bit about, where I got the idea to do the book and sort of what I try to tell. So it's been 15 years since the invasion of Iraq, and in many ways, much has changed in the country. A dictator's been toppled, local governments have reorganized, and elections have become a little bit freer and fairer. At the same time, though, much is the same. While there are new systems of power, new leaders, corruption is still a major issue, and in many ways has been facilitated by Western interventionism. And most importantly, I think the local economy is in a tailspin, particularly in the Kurdish region of Iraq, where my book is focused. I've come to realize that the declining economy is perhaps the biggest struggle Iraq faces today. Understanding how the economy got to where it is, I think, is important to understanding how the country can move forward in the future. So I've spent a lot of time in the country since 2013, mostly following the rise of ISIS, but much of my work has come out of the Kurdish region. I hope to be able to shed some light on some of my findings over the years and how the region's oil sector folds into the national economy and facilitates some of the corruption in the region and throughout the country. And maybe, hopefully, we can get a better understanding of how people are feeling about their leaders and their economy and sort of their future. One thing I've found talking to people throughout my time in Iraq is that they worry about the war and having to move into camps and things like this, but sort of the common denominator is that people are really just worried about putting food on the table at night for a lot of people, and how are they going to find their next meal, will their jobs actually pay them for the work they do? That's been a big problem in Iraq. Because of the declining economy. And so I'd like to read some of the interviews I did with people on the ground in Iraq, because I think oftentimes when we talk about how can things get better or how can things move forward in Iraq, some of those local voices often get lost. And so I hope to sort of bring those back into the forefront of the conversation today. So before I talk about the book and some of my findings, I'd like to just talk about a couple of different things that set the picture. So oil revenues make up about 80% of Iraq's budget. Basically, oil rules all in Iraq. It's important to note, though, that the oil sector looks really different from the northern region to the southern region, and I won't go into too much of the granular details because that can often be boring. But the contract models are really different, and the way that the oil sector is developed are quite different. And so, oil might have been found in the northern region decades ago, but the contracts really didn't get going until 2002, so right around the time of the invasion. So oil is what makes the world go round in Iraqi Kurdistan. And so when the economy goes into a tailspin, like it has over the last few years, it's important to look at what went wrong. So talking about the book a bit, so for those of you who don't know, my book is Pipe Dreams, The Plundering of Iraq's Oil Wealth, and it looks at the Kurdish region in Iraq, and the reason for that is because most of my time reporting has been spent in the northern region, mostly because of access. It's quite easier to get into that part of the country than the southern portion of the country, especially during the war with ISIS. And so this region is a classic case of the resource curse, really. And the book deals with these issues around corruption and transparency in oil. And it looks at how the oil sector emerged and how it changed over time and how the UK and the US played a really big role in its development. And it chronicles Western involvement in the development, as I said. And some of the players I mentioned in the book are former Bush administration officials who now hold, high-paying executive positions in multinational oil companies, and were sort of involved in the conversations about the war and oil during their time in the administration. Some of them are at Exxon now. So I worked on the book for several years, and the story of oil in Iraq is long and complicated, and it can be written about in several different books. And so Columbia Global Reports is a publisher that does pretty small books. We attempt to take a topic and break it down in a way that readers will understand, but this is just a sliver of the story, really. And so I'd like to read a couple of passages from the book. The book really looks at ways in which the oil money has been diverted from local people, how it's gone into the pockets of politicians, how it's been sort of siphoned off onto the black market, and it's really, it was supposed to go back into funding infrastructure projects like schools and hospitals and roads. People in throughout Iraq and in the northern region where I focus thought that their lives would get immeasurably better once Saddam was gone, once oil companies came in. They thought they'd get jobs, they thought their economy would get better, and actually a lot of people feel that economically they're worse off than they were before. And so the book tries to understand why that is and how they got to where they are today. So I'm going to read a part of my chapter, Sufferings of Corruption, and it looks at how the top-level corruption has facilitated by the West has sort of trickled down into the local economy and sort of exists on a very low level within hospitals and the taxi cab system. And so I attempt to sort of show you how that has happened. And then I'll read a little bit about a man who has worked in the oil sector for both Erbil and Baghdad in the north and the south. And he used to protect the oil fields. And he lost his job. Companies hired their own security. And so a lot of people ended up losing their jobs in this sector. And so he's basically in a internally displaced persons camp where his home is next to this pipeline that's now on fire or was on fire, and he sort of used to be able to protect his home in that pipeline and can't anymore. So let's go to Sufferings of Corruption here. Okay. Almost 10 years ago, Garan Mustafa crashed his car on one of the main roadways in Erbil, shattering his shin bone. Since then, he has worked almost every day to rebuild the muscles in his calf. He still can't walk without a small limp, though he plays soccer weekly and exercises at his local gym. I sit there and I move my leg, and somehow the doctor thinks I'm disabled. He says he can write a paper that says I'm disabled so I can earn money from the government, Mustafa tells me. He receives disability benefits, but he also works as an advisor to the Kurdish Finance Ministry and to the Department of Coordination and Follow-up, proposing policies for financial reform. Instances like Mustafa's explain how the public service sector in Iraqi Kurdistan has grown from one that was manageable even under a declining economy to a size so impossibly big that it seems untenable even to the smartest economists. The bureaucracy led the cabinet to cut high-ranking officials' salaries by a whopping 75% in 2016, while payroll for lower-level employees went down by as much as 20%. There are thousands of people on the government payroll that shouldn't be on it, Mustafa says, but it's impossible to identify them without extensive audits. It takes a long time to go through all the lists of people that can call them to ensure they are who they say they are. Kurdish officials, however, put much of the blame for the region's crumbling economy, not on bloated payrolls or on the lack of accountability and transparency, but on the matters seemingly out of their control. They blame an influx of Syrian refugees and internally displaced Iraqis fleeing ISIS or the government in Baghdad. The Kurds still adamantly maintain they have a right to not only develop their own natural resource sector, but to manage their own oil finances. Many Kurds are so fiercely loyal to the notion of Kurdish independence that government corruption and fraud are forgotten amid resentment toward Baghdad. So that's just a little bit about what's going on with the payroll. Let's go through. The dichotomy between those who have capitalized on Iraqi Kurdistan's oil and those who haven't can even be seen in the physical layout of Erbil. Near the international airport, 50-story apartment buildings adorned with crystal chandeliers tower over the garbage collectors who pick up the trash in the luxury complexes each day. The apartments house international oil traders and contractors, as well as government employees linked to the oil market. Next to the apartment complex sits the Divan Hotel, a lavish building that provides lodging for international traders and businessmen. Rooms there run more than $300 a night. Behind the building lies a makeshift refugee camp that houses 30 Yazidi refugee families who fled the predations of ISIS. They're hungry and say government and charitable food assistance is inconsistent. Next to the ancient citadel downtown, gold merchants sit slumped over their glass cabinets holding dozens of necklaces, earrings, and bracelets. It's been slow here for about a year, one merchant says, nervously rearranging the gold jewelry on his felt tray. Our profits are down about 20%. At his office in the rambling, government-run Rizgari Hospital, Dr. Shakwan Diazi, the facilities manager, sits in a leather chair in his front desk. He's dressed in a button-down shirt and quality shoes he says he bought in London. Coming from a wealthy family close to the KDP leadership, he uses what's left of his inheritance to live in Royal City, the lavish apartment complex across from the Divan Hotel, and sends his daughter to a prestigious high school near the border with Iran. She will attend university in London, he says. You see, he continues, I come from a rich family, so for me, the crisis doesn't really affect me. If I go back and change things, though, I wouldn't be a doctor here. But I'm too old to start a new life now. My daughter is still young. She has a chance for a better future. But his hospital, Erbil's largest, is suffering, as are its employees and patients. He has just $13,000 per month to spend on maintenance and upkeep, far less than he says he needs. The other month, our elevator broke, the one that goes to the operating floor, and I had no money to fix it. All of Kurdistan depends on his hospital's single CAT scan machine. If it breaks, there's not enough money to replace it, he tells me. He oversees 1,700 employees. Most of them work 2 or 3 jobs. Sometimes they don't show up because they make more money in their other professions. My job here requires that I discipline them, that I yell at them, the doctor says. I don't feel like I can. I can't blame them for wanting to make money, but at the same time, it makes my job really hard. High-level doctors at the hospital like Diazi make just $500 a month. During better times, they make close to $2,500 a month. Doctors below him in rank make even less, $200 a month. Thousands of doctors have fled Erbil since 2014 and are now practicing in Europe, he says. Those who remain often leave their public jobs at 1 p.m. and go to their more lucrative private clinics, where they work until about 9 p.m. Others work as taxi drivers. Deteriorating conditions in the hospital mimic the city as a whole. In some wings, walls have gaping holes. The emergency room on the first floor is overflowing with patients. Dozens sit in the hallway eating bits of bread and dates, waiting for a turn to talk to the doctor or nurse. Because of the lack of available specialists, the emergency room here acts as a filter for all non-surgical patients. It also has one of the only blood laboratories in the city. By the early afternoon, the hospital's operating floor is empty and silent. All the doctors have left for their other jobs. Sometimes I think I should just move to London and stay there, says Diazi. It has more opportunity, but my extended family needs me here. They need my support. A pile of dirty scrubs lies on the floor. Bloodied clogs line the hallway outside the operating theater. I'm just going to read one more portion here. So this chapter is called The Guardians of the Treasure, and it's about the man I was speaking about before, who his whole life was really protecting oil, and he no longer has that job. Iraqi Kurdistan's frustration over the oil export impasse with Baghdad is eclipsed by another concern, keeping its vast reserve under Kurdish command and out of the hands of ISIS, which explains why these days, despite the hard economic times, the government in Erbil, in coordination with local councils, has greatly bolstered spending on military and police. It is the job of Kirkuk Police Commander Sarhad Kadir to protect not just the wells, but entire oil fields and the pipelines serving them. The military compound where Kadir works is ringed by concrete walls, and dozens of armed men sit at checkpoints on the main road leading from the highway to the offices inside the compound. The atmosphere inside, however, is surprisingly relaxed. Men stroll around the gardens, smoking cigarettes and exchanging jokes. Our meeting with Kadir is postponed for 3 hours. So we wait in the courtyard and visit with the media team, whose members are putting together video footage of security forces manning the oil fields. Qadir's office walls are lined with photographs of him with American officials and diplomats who served under the Bush administration, whom Qadir worked with to track down al-Qaeda members in Kirkuk during the 2003 war. Now he's doing the same thing with ISIS, but ISIS seems to have far more money than al-Qaeda had, he says. No terrorist group has ever had as much access to cash. The government contracted with the local villages to hire people to protect the oil rigs, Qadir explains, but those contractors often failed in their duties. With that setup, there were gaps in security that allowed for terrorists to explode pipelines and steal oil, he said. Since then, the Kurds have decided they needed to create a robust counterterrorism force that focuses on infiltrating ISIS cells to stop attacks. Every month, it feels like dozens of oil employees are getting killed by ISIS attacks, he says. There's so much infrastructure in the area that ISIS wants, because if you have Kirkuk, you have all of Iraq. Collusion is still a problem, as some oil workers help the terrorist network by transporting stolen oil or even feed the group information about how to attack the pipelines. Let's see. Okay. To see Kurdistan's vast oil fields, you have to drive from Erbil toward Kirkuk, past a poor village with crumbling buildings that have no roofs or on potholed streets that aren't paved, featuring just one restaurant, covered in dust, that serves fish from a nearby river. At an intersection, young children line up to buy colored ice in paper cups from a vendor manning a mobile cooler. 5 miles past the village, vast cornfields that feed the villagers give way to an arid landscape of jagged boulders. Gigantic slabs of rock jut out from the ground, looking unnatural, as if someone with an unseen hand had carved them. As we drive on, even bigger craters and slabs of stone block our path. We feel like we're driving on Mars. The barren landscape would seem to match the poverty of the village we've just left behind. But in fact, once you reach Dibis, a town 40 minutes northwest of Kirkuk, you'll have reached some of Kurdistan's richest oil fields. This is the heart of the Kurdish government's cash machine, and the fields are protected by some of the most well-trained and best-equipped soldiers in the region. Night has fallen, and the soldier security guards from the region's oil and gas police, armed with AK-47s, jump into the back of an open jeep. We follow down a rocky road that then leads up a hill to a ridge above town to a breathtaking vantage point. A massive oil field stretches seemingly forever under the black desert sky, shooting orange flames into the air from wells flaring toxins and excess natural gas. When these fields were overrun by ISIS in August 2016, the terror group's operatives blew up a part of the pipeline running through the town. I've come to see the man who knows more about the running battle with ISIS than perhaps anyone in Kurdistan, Commander Kamal Kirkuki, a veteran Peshmerga from the Kurdistan Democratic Party and a former Speaker of Parliament. Kirkuki, who is in his mid-60s, is a slender man, unassuming in his traditional Kurdish clothing. Kirkuki commands the Peshmerga's elite frontline troops here, policing Dibis and its surrounding villages, and, as a priority, the oil and gas fields. As Kirkuki dims the light, a large projector drops down from the ceiling, and he runs through the same presentation he gave the representatives of the U.S. military just minutes earlier. The Peshmerga had received new intelligence from U.S. drone footage of ISIS fighters hiding out in a nearby house. The drone captured footage of a car driving down a dirt road and into a small driveway. This house is where about 20 soldiers are hiding. They're going into that house now, but they won't come out again.
Thank you so much, Erin, for giving us that snapshot of what life is like in the north. So with that, we're shifting back to the U.S. And back to New York City with Marina Budhos' award-winning novel Watched, which examines what it's like to grow up under surveillance through the story of Naeem, a Bangladeshi-American teenager in Jackson Heights. Marina actually had one launch of this book at the workshop in 2016. That was a live stage production of the book. And I believe you also did a staging in Jackson Heights. So this book is very rooted in New York City, and you'll really feel it when you listen to her read. Mustafa Bayoumi writes, delving into the real human costs of today's surveillance culture, Watched reveals profound immigrant truths about survival and betrayal and what it really means to feel like you belong. Watched is actually Marina's third book in the series about immigrant teens, which includes Ask Me No Questions, which was published in 2006, and Tell Us We're Home in 2010. She's received a Rona Jaffe Award for Women Writers, has been a Fulbright Scholar to India, and is currently a professor of English at William Patterson University. Please welcome Marina Budhos.
Yeah, it's true. We did do a launch here. I'm just going to lower this. It's supposed to be easy, yeah? Okay. We did do a launch with a theater company, Theater 167, which was founded actually in Jackson Heights, 167 being all of the languages that are spoken in Queens. And so part of what was really fascinating about it was the sort of stories that the actors themselves could bring to enacting these roles that they were doing. So it was this very interactive thing. And I was going to also mention, we did bring it to the streets of Jackson Heights. So we performed scenes from the book, and these were the streets that actually had inspired the book in so many ways. So it was really a cool kind of thing. And just a little anecdote about that. So because we were doing it, we did it in Diversity Plaza. I don't know how many of you know Jackson Heights, but Diversity Plaza is the area when you just come down from the elevated train. So we were doing it there, but we also did it in other areas. You were given a map, and you could go see the scenes both in interior spaces and street spaces. But we were doing it, and so because we did it in this public space, we were assigned 2 cops, because they had to watch us do watched. And so they were with us the whole day, and it was we had all these conversations with them about the fact that we were enacting a drama that was about police surveillance, which was kind of interesting. And then while we were doing it, there were these kind of, these neighborhood guys hanging out there, drinking their chai, watching us, trying to understand, like, what is going on here? And at a certain point, they saw the scenes, and they were like, don't do that. Police are right there. You can't talk about this. So it was this weird way where there was this cycle between art and reality and art. So that's kind of what I like to do in my fiction. I write fiction, but I'm very much grounded in sort of taking the documentary or taking what is, what really is out there. So this was inspired by the actual New York Police Department program of surveillance and just sort of the atmosphere of surveillance that was going on. The only thing, I'm going to read a few scenes from the book to give you some flavor for it, but the only thing you really need to know is, and I'll kind of, cue you along the way, is that Naeem is 18 years old. He's supposed to be finishing high school, but he's a slacker. He's not really getting there. He's an eternal procrastinator. I'm sure none of you know anything about that. I have a 17-year-old son, so I know all about it. And he gets himself, he's very aware of being watched in the neighborhood. So this is just, the other thing is his parents run a shop in Jackson Heights, and they're really struggling with this neighborhood shop. The watching, it seeps into everything in our neighborhood. It's like weather, the barometric pressure lowering. Before the monsoons came in Bangladesh, you could feel the air thicken and squat on your head, a constant ache behind your eyeballs. For the past few years, there's been another kind of pressure, a vibration around us, the air pressing down, muffling our mouths. We see the men coming down the metal stairs from the elevated subway or parked in cars for hours on end. Clean-cut guys, creased khakis, rolled up sleeves, the breath of Manhattan steaming off their clothes. They aren't from around here, that we can tell. Not like the young couples with their big padded strollers, or the girls with peacocks and holes in their black tights who moved to the nice part of Jackson Heights, carry yoga mats and cloth bags from stores I've never heard of. No, these people are different. They stroll into stores, finger the edges of the newspapers in their racks, check out flyers taped to the side of the fridge. One day, two of them came into my parents' store, pretended to buy some gum, and then asked a few questions about the travel agency upstairs. Where's the man who runs this place, Mr. Ahmed? How often does he come in? Does he stay after hours? Abba shook his head. I do not watch my neighbor so much. He's from Pakistan. That is all I know. Yet you hold packages for him? Yes, but that is because they are not open all the time. It is favor. The man consulted a tiny notebook. You attend the same mosque, Al-Noor Masjid? At this, Abba froze, fingers resting light on the register, staring at the door. No, we are praying at different place. It hurt my heart hearing this. Abba's English, when he spoke to strangers, was halting yet proper. He'd studied some English in Bangladesh and hated sounding uneducated to Americans. Abba, I whispered after the detectives left and touched his arm. You okay? He stirred and blinked. I am fine, but his voice was rough at the edges. So this is what, Naeem is growing up with. He's very aware, his parents sort of, lecture him on how to behave with the police. They've actually stopped going to the mosque because of sort of everything that's going on. But given this, he's still an 18-year-old kid, and he's with his friend Ibrahim. And all I'm going to say is Ibrahim kind of does a prank on him, and that prank lands him with the cops. Ibrahim gets away. Ibrahim's something of a pathological liar and was sort of playing a game, trying on expensive suits at a mall. And so Naeem is kind of left with the goods, and he's left with these cops. And he himself has done a little bit of shoplifting in the past. So I'm going to read the scene where he's first meeting these cops. Meeting is probably not the right word. You want some water? The man shifts his legs, leans forward, pushes a Poland Spring bottle across the table. For a cop, this guy's treated me pretty well, like a visitor almost. It's weird. When we arrived at the police station, I wasn't booked. Instead, one of the cops leaned across the desk and talked softly to a woman. Someone else led me by the elbow down a hall. They took my backpack, my phone, but that was it. Now I'm in this room with no windows, rubbing the raw creases on my wrist, sitting across from a tall, lanky guy. Taylor, he says his name is, and he doesn't even have a uniform. A detective, I figure. What's to investigate? Pretty straightforward. Dumb high school senior stuffed 3 Ralph Lauren shirts in his backpack. My partner will be here soon, Taylor explains. Won't be a minute. Go ahead. Drink up. I unscrew the bottle cap and suck down water. My throat burns, peppery mad. It wasn't me, I want to say. My friend. He's a pathological liar, a freak, and he does stuff like that. They don't give me a chance. They just make me wait, which is worse in a way. Taylor looks at a folder, taps his knuckle against the tabletop using a chunky school ring. He even smiles at me. You're at Newtown High, right? Yeah. I went to Van Buren, played basketball for them. You play? I shoot hoops, play a little soccer. Nothing regular. He shrugs, looks away. I feel as if I've disappointed him somehow. He goes back to tapping his ring, rhythmic, 1, 2. My own heart's jumping, a scared beat. No one has called my parents, which has me relieved and scared. Give it a few more hours, though, and my cell phone, wherever it is, will vibrate. My stepmother never texts, says it mixes her up, that tiny screen. She will speak very softly, bewildered, so I can barely hear her. Naeem, didn't you say you would come home by 8? She never knows exactly how to be a mother to me. She speaks to me sometimes like a son, scolding, and sometimes as a brother. The door swings open. Another guy strides in. Blue hoodie, Timberland boots. He's glaring. I can see ragged sweat stains beneath his armpits. Never mess with a man who's sweating a lot. He's already in a bad mood. So, the story is ready to press charges, and the Staples incident will be used on setting bail. We're not talking juvenile court, of course. You're already 18. You know about that? He tilts his forehead down as if to say, are you kidding? He's heavy set with a thick, scrunched brow, a coppery sheen to his skin. He reminds me of my gym teacher when I come up with some lame excuse as to why I didn't bring my shorts. Not doing well in school. There's a prickly sensation at the back of my neck. Just that weird pixelated feeling when I know I'm being tracked in stores, on the streets. How could he know that? What do you mean? I'm going to Queens College, I blurt, jutting out my chin. He smiles. I am. Taylor leans forward, sets his hand on my wrist. Mine looks so skinny under his broad palm. Hey, calm down. I had a lousy GPA too. It's not the end of the world. He gives me a reassuring smile, which washes me in confusion, then anger. I'm supposed to hate these guys. They're the ones Amma tells me to stay away from. Now he's talking about high school basketball and GPAs. He's trying to fritz my circuits. I remember my cousin Taslima warning me about the cops, how they pick you up, spook you, take you to the station. A kid I know was 2 hours short on his community service and they pulled this bull. Stay cool. But it's hard. Taylor's watching me with a careful gaze. The other guy, who hasn't even told me his name, has retreated into sullen silence. This is worse than if they'd asked me questions, yelled, did all those mean and swaggering gestures they do on police shows. Okay, let's look at your options. We can take you down the hall and book you. I'd put my money on a conviction. They're really cracking down these days, even on small infractions. But it was my friend who did it. Yeah, right, that's original. The men smile at each other. Burning, I stare down at my knuckles. He's just trying to scare me. And your parents, they can put up the bail? I don't answer. I thought so. Every time you fill out a job application, you'll have to say, I was arrested for a misdemeanor. I'll put money on a conviction. That's even worse. Imagine explaining that for the rest of your life. I don't say anything. Your parents, they came over when? My father 11 years ago, my stepmother a long time ago. I add hopefully. She went to school here. Their papers in order? A knot tightens in my stomach. She's a citizen. My dad has a green card. We're okay. You sure? Yes. You know any trouble on a green card, it can be revoked, right? There's a thumping deep as a bass in my chest. No, I didn't know. My voice is a lot smaller now. Here's the thing, Naeem. That's the other guy, Taylor. He seems concerned, his voice soothing. There's another option. I don't budge. Naeem, look at me. I lift my head. I can see that Taylor is all neutral, pewter eyes and gray hair trimmed tight around his ears. Unlike the other guy, he wears a crisp white shirt, the sleeves neatly folded above his elbows. I remember those shirts in Macy's. 3 lousy shirts. We can have the charges dropped, easy. I feel a quiver of relief. That would be great. I promise. I won't do it again. It was my friend. He puts a palm up. We have a need. A need? I swallow. For guys like you. You can keep an eye on things in the neighborhood. Where? The mosque. My eyes swing between them, bewildered. I don't even go to the mosque. Not anymore. Not even my dad. That's okay. There's a lot of other things you can do, like chat rooms, friends. That's very helpful to us. Student groups, Muslim student associations. I don't join any of that stuff. I don't like politics. He grins. Even better. I jam down in my seat. If I go very still, like a lizard that changes color, they'll lose sight of me, forget I'm here. That's what I want. To not be seen, to not be so noticed. I'm a loser, a kid who's wobbling through senior year. Just a smudge in their calculations. Close the folder, mister, please, and walk away. Let me go. So they've got him in a vice grip, as you can sort of see. I'm just going to jump ahead and read one more section from the novel. I don't think I'm giving anything away that clearly Naeem is ultimately going to sort of get ensnared in this. And part of what's interesting for me about his journey, it's a kind of odyssey, is actually what he gets out of being a watcher, going from being watched to being a watcher, even with the conflict. And while I was writing the book, I'd sort of written the book. I actually read about a kid, a Bangladeshi kid who got arrested, pot, the same sort of thing. And one of the lines he said about what he thought he was doing when he decided to do this is he said, I thought I was going to be a hero. I wanted to be a hero. And that is kind of what fascinated me about this. And so that was a little bit what I was trying to dig out in this story. So I'm just going to read a little section because the novel is also to me a little bit of a love song to New York, even as it's under surveillance. And just a section that kind of captures the New York piece of this. So this is after his... Now I go to mosques all the time. As the summer draws down deep and furiously hot, I seek them out. They're a chain of islands across the boroughs, Midwood, Ozone Park, Bay Ridge, Kensington. I follow them one by one, the small where you press on a gate, head grazing a brick doorway, the storefront masjids where they hang strips of thick plastic in the winter, and where all the cabbies go before heading on their routes. The big one with an imam booming into a microphone, so many men showing up that loudspeakers are fixed to the doors outside so the others can pray in the courtyard. I learn the worn-out shapes of shoes left in cubbies, the chemical smell of a dry cleaner seeping through the walls in one. I bend and fold, touch my forehead to a small rug. The men recite their melodies twining pure over my head. After I sit, I make my features sad and sincere at once. I speak softly about my black days, my impure thoughts, how I did drugs, fell off the path, how found, how seen I feel now. It takes time. First their eyes flit with suspicion. No one takes me up. They've been trained not to trust. Then a slow softening. Like Amma flicking her wrist, slowly working the little balls of dough into supple paratas. I'm a boy, after all, a brother, a son. I have to stay with it. An imam listens, gently gives me Quran passages to read and recite. Or a youth leader takes me aside. There's a film in my head. My eyes do a sweep of the room, note names, groups, speakers, countries people have visited if it comes up. Whatever numbers I can I load into my phone. Friend who I can on Facebook, sneak click pictures. Half the stuff I know Taylor doesn't need, but he says it doesn't matter. This is a kind of practice as good as any devotion. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that incredible reading, Marina. Those were 3 really amazing parts of that book. So I guess if Marina's book kind of looks at how the good Muslim, bad Muslim kind of dichotomy plays out for young Muslims who've grown up since 9/11, Nisha Kapoor's book kind of looks at the question of innocence more broadly, or maybe who is already not seen as innocent by criminal justice systems. I'm really proud to introduce Nisha Kapoor, who's visiting us from the UK. Her book, Deport, Deprive, and Extradite, 21st Century State Extremism, weaves case studies and political history to show how the extradition of Muslim men in the US and the UK accused of terrorism offenses emerges as a modern form of expulsion. Vijay Prashad writes, this is courageous research, a book that should be read by all citizens of the 21st century states that claim to be fighting extremism, but have themselves become extremist states. Nisha is a lecturer in sociology, and she explains in the book also how she came into this work through her own activism as a young person. And I was really lucky to meet her, like actually 2 years ago, when she was visiting the US, before the book manuscript got sold. So it's such an honor to share space with you and to introduce you. And thank you so much for your work. All right, Nisha Kapoor.
Thank you. Do I need to just... Thanks for the invitation. Thanks to everybody who's been involved in organising this, to folks at Verso as well as the Asian American Writers Workshop. It's a real honor to be part of this event. I want to just say that I'm still kind of in UK time, so it's really late for me right now, so bear with me. I mean, I guess as we sit and reflect on the sort of 15 years since 2003, one of the things that was, as I was thinking about kind of what to say and how to present parts of the book that in a way that would be appropriate for this event, I wanted to think not only about the sort of legacy and the aftermath of the last 15 years, but also that when we talk about Iraq, we need to think about the sort of longer colonial and imperial history, certainly sitting in Britain as I do, but and then also, you know, to think about, to contextualize the criminalization of Muslims in the context of the war on terror and relate that to the sort of earlier displacements that were brought about by the Gulf Wars of the 1990s. And there's a case that I'll talk about in a second, which kind of indicates the continuities and the sort of shifts in racialization that take place over this kind of period of history. The book itself is on these extradition. It's sort of focused around and centered around these extradition cases. A group of Muslim men who, over the course of, well, I should say that in 2003, an extradition treaty is passed between the US and the UK, which allows for individuals to be extradited to the US without the US having to provide prima facie evidence. And there's a small number of Muslim men who are, and the justification for this is, of course, to assist in fighting the war on terror. And even though there's large numbers of people who are being extradited, there's only a very small number of people who are being extradited, of Muslims who are extradited on terrorism offences, but they become the kind of, the way in which the sort of measure becomes legitimated. And one of the sort of post 9/11, some of these terrorism cases actually begin in the 1990s, in the late 1990s, but in 2001, post 9/11, the first person who is who's arrested in relation to the 9/11 attacks is an Algerian national living in the UK at the time, and he becomes kind of big in the national imagination, at least in Britain, for sort of depicting this idea that the terrorist threat is also, you know, is global but is present very much at home. And at that time, because of the possibility of scrutinizing the evidence that was coming forth from the US, he's not actually extradited. The British courts say you can't send him because it turns out that there wasn't really any substantial evidence. It was a false call, and the US just wanted to bring him over in order to question him, to find out if he knew anything, because he had been trained at the same flight school that some of the hijackers were, that had been training at. But so one of the, and it's kind of on the back of that the Home Secretary in the UK at the time justifies the need to pass this treaty with the US to allow for a much more efficient way of sort of doing extradition. And kind of as the book progresses, you see how what is happening but kind of difficult in the sort of late 1990s and early 2000s becomes much more possible because of the continuous use of high-profile terrorism cases that you know, the media sort of conjures and make into these kind of these individual cases that become kind of these big demonic tropes used to sort of mobilize popular consensus for passing authoritarian measures. They kind of really help the advancement of a whole range of kind of things. So from the increasing use of secret justice in the UK to citizenship deprivation to mass deportation and so on, they sort of really help provide the kind of ideological work and sort of help justify and legitimate a whole number of authoritarian kind of measures. And what I try to do in the book is take all of the cases of individuals, all of these individuals who are extradited, not in a way to talk about, to sort of name the injustice through just telling the stories of these particular guys, and try and present kind of the basis of the evidence against them, and the actions or behaviors that they're accused of doing as in the name of sort of terrorism offences, to bring that out, but also not to discriminate between the kind of clean, innocent cases and the more complicated cases where they might be sort of more difficult politically, or there might be sort of issues such as Abu Hamza's case, because he himself becomes really important sort of trope in the media for mobilizing the justification of citizenship deprivation, for example, as one kind of measure. So I try to sort of move beyond the sort of question of sort of racializing only the innocent, to sort of argue that if we want to be against the passing of authoritarian disciplinary measures, we have to be against passing them in the name of anyone. Just to come back to the Iraq sort of link, I think that one of the things that's sort of illuminated in one of the cases in particular, who's I'll read an extract from the book in relation to, is the way in which the way in which the sort of terrorism and national security discourse comes to infiltrate all kinds of broader political issues, the border regime being, as you're experiencing heavily here in the US, comes to kind of be practiced. So it's not that we don't have mass, increasing numbers of asylum seekers being incarcerated and deported through the 1990s, but the way in which asylum seekers are racialized is largely in terms of, and demonized, are largely in terms of being kind of economic burden, and sort of welfare scroungers, and all kinds of sort of negative but economic related justifications through the 1990s becomes much more discussed in terms of an issue of securitization in post 9/11, and so allows for the sort of hardening of the sort of border regime, and we have a massive growth of mass deportation being used in the UK. And one of the things that's quite interesting in the case of Hilal al-Jeddah, one of the guys I talk about in the book, is that he arrives in the UK in the 1990s as an Iraqi asylum seeker, and he is granted citizenship eventually in 2000 as an asylum seeker, and then in 2004 he becomes a terrorist suspect. And so through his case you kind of witness the re-racialization of individuals who are still demonized as asylum seekers, but become sort of racialized and kind of as terrorism suspects sort of post 2001, 2002, 2003. And so the state is allowed to pass, so it becomes kind of, even the sort of liberal consensus becomes less forgiving in terms of what's legitimate, what can be done through or to these individuals. And then not just in terms of policing these individuals solely, but obviously this has kind of much bigger consequences and more long-lasting consequences for the legacies of the imposition of these measures themselves. And so in the UK, one of the kind of key things that's happened on the back of high-profile terrorism cases, Abu Hamza actually in 2002, was the implementation of legislation allowing the British government to deprive somebody of their citizenship on a much kind of lower threshold than had been allowed previously. And it becomes informally known by lawyers as the Hamza Amendment, because it's in his name that the piece of legislation is passed. And it's on the back of a kind of media campaign to deport these Islamic preachers that are present in Britain. the popular consensus kind of mobilized, and the Home Secretary at the time gets a massive letters from the public demanding that this guy be deported because he's a British citizen. He can't be, and so the Home Secretary understands that something has to be done, and on the back of this, a piece of legislation is passed. And then in 2006, the legislation is enhanced again, the threshold is lowered, and so you can deprive somebody of their citizenship if it's in the public interest to do so. And then through Halal al-Jedda's case, who's the guy who comes in as an asylum seeker in the 1990s, and then kind of criminalized again as a terrorism suspect in 2004, further legislation is passed. And it's on this that I'll just read a section from the book on. I'm an academic writer trying to be a proper writer, so I can't write as well as some of the other people who have read. Okay. In September 2004, after Allied forces had reoccupied Iraq, Halal travelled back to his country of birth with his 4 eldest children. Possession of a British passport and being granted citizenship freed up his ability to travel, and from 2000 onwards, he had travelled back and forth to Central Asia on numerous occasions, including to Iraq. During a trip to Syria, he was apprehended by authorities without explanation and detained for 11 months before he was released. Soon after, Halal and his wife divorced, and he married a second time in 2001 while in Jordan and became a father again. His 4 children with his first wife are all British citizens. En route to Iraq with his family in autumn 2004, Halal was arrested and questioned in Dubai by United Arab Emirates intelligence officers, who released him after 12 hours, permitting him and his children to travel on to their journey to Iraq. Less than 2 weeks after his arrival, the United States soldiers acting on information provided by British intelligence services arrested Halal at his sister's house in Baghdad. The grounds, he learned later, related to his facilitating the travel of another individual to Iraq, who the authorities had identified as a terrorism explosives expert, and some other related conspiracy charges. Halal was taken to Basra in a British military aircraft and then to the Sheheba Divisional Temporary Detention Facility in Basra City, a detention centre run by British forces. The precarious and artificial protection offered by his British citizenship is reflected in his incarceration there for 3 years until December 2007 without charge, which was handled by representatives of the Iraqi and British governments and by non-British military personnel, and authorised on the basis of intelligence never disclosed to him. Nevertheless, Halal's British citizenship granted him the ability to appeal against his detention to the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled that his rights to liberty and security had been violated as a result. One of the things that's kind of worth noting is that the European Court of Human Rights, while condoning extensive sort of harsh measures for incarcerating terrorism suspects within Britain and the US itself, has condemned the British government for its actions in Iraq. So there's a way in which human rights is being co-opted to allow for the sort of domestic incarceration, like in supermax prisons and so on, which is torturous, but sort of condemns something that's kind of parallel in a sort of military context. However, Halal al-Jeddah became another test case for the powers of deprivation of citizenship. A month before his release, then Home Secretary Jackie Smith issued a notification order informing him of her intention to deprive him of his citizenship on the grounds that to do so was conducive to the public good. This was one of the first times that the enhanced deprivation powers and the lowered threshold for removing citizenship passed under the Immigration, Nationality and Asylum Act 2006 had been used. It was administered in such a way which meant that Halal, detained in Iraq at the time, was unable to challenge the notification, and 1 month following, on the 12th of December 2007, he was officially deprived of his citizenship. So while he's detained, he's deprived of it, while he's detained in Iraq, he's deprived of his citizenship without possibility of appealing. When he was released from prison at the end of December with neither a British passport nor officially recognised by Iraqi nationality, having Iraqi nationality, he moved to Turkey, from where he launched an appeal to regain his British citizenship. 16 months after the notification depriving Halal al-Jeddah of his citizenship had been delivered by the Home Office, the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, which is a court that deals with deportation orders and national security cases, and a court that allows for secret evidence. So the person appealing their deportation isn't necessarily allowed to see all the evidence against them. Some of it is in secret, and their lawyer isn't allowed to see it either, so it becomes quite difficult to mount an appeal. The Special Immigration Appeals Commission dismissed his appeal, holding that secret evidence presented by intelligence authorities indicated that Halal had been planning to carry out an attack against coalition forces. Like Min Pham, Halal was represented by a special advocate in court and was not privy to the closed evidence which had secured the judgment. On appealing the decision, Halal's lawyers argued that since he had lost his Iraqi citizenship when he became a British citizen, as stipulated by Iraqi law at the time, to revoke his British citizenship would make him stateless. The Home Office countered that subsequent changes in Iraqi law after the fall of Saddam Hussein meant that Halal could reapply for his Iraqi citizenship, and the statelessness would be a result of his own doing. After a 6-year battle, the Supreme Court eventually ruled in 2013 in agreement with Halal, deciding that the Home Office's actions would make him stateless and overturned the Home Secretary's order. Halal al-Jeddah is the only person to have successfully challenged the loss of his citizenship under the 2006 law, which perhaps reflected the changing political climate in relation to Iraq, in relation to the Iraq War by 2013. Shortly after the Supreme Court hearing, but before the judgment was announced, the Home Office informed the court that it had discovered that Halal's Iraqi passport, which Halal had previously described as fake, was in fact genuine and had been used several times to travel. The Home Office added that it had received reports from the Iraqi government that it regarded him as a citizen and that Halal's name appeared on its register of citizens. The Supreme Court ruled that it was too late to introduce this evidence. Within 3 weeks of the judgment, the Home Office issued a second deprivation order on the same national security grounds, but this time arguing that they had new evidence to support their case and that he had used a genuine Iraqi passport. Halal thus became the first person to have his citizenship stripped twice. A second appeal process began and is still continuing years later. In the meantime, the government passed a new amendment which would further strengthen their case should their second attempt fail. On the back of the appeal ruling in relation to the first deprivation order in 2013, Theresa May, the then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister, began to cite Halal al-Jeddah's case as proof of the need to further revise the law, resulting in the addition of an amendment to the 2014 immigration bill. And the legislation that's passed in 2014 is the legislation that says you can make somebody stateless if you believe they can acquire citizenship elsewhere. And it's on this that Min Pham, another guy who's extradited to the US in 2015, is extradited and deprived of his citizenship at the same time. And that's the kind of progression that we've had since the late 1990s. I'll leave it there.
All right, we're gonna switch to the Q&A now. That went by really fast for me. It looks like it's actually almost 9. So I wrote all these questions, but I'm hoping to condense them into maybe one master question, and then we can take questions from the audience. So here comes the panel. Does everyone have enough space? Okay. Thank you so much for all those readings, and thanks for everyone in the audience. That was like so many amazing and different types of work gathered together. I'm actually sort of wondering what you all make of each other's work right now.
I like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I should look into that. Like, that kind of correlates with it. Yeah, it was really great.
I was also thinking when I was reading your book, Nisha, that some of the places you describe, I mean, some of the parts of Queens your characters have been in are also, you know, in Marina's book, and, you know, all these people, real and imagined, are sort of meeting each other on the page. But yeah, I think to condense my questions, so I'm curious to hear what you all made of each other's work, and then my kind of personal question that I was curious about was just, you know, wondering where you all were in 2003. You know, do you remember like that moment, or like what your political thinking, or even like what your personal reaction was to the U.S. invasion of Iraq? You know, do you think when you look back that it kind of dramatically changed your life trajectory for, you know, personal or political reasons?
No, I could start. I remember prior to the start of the war, I was very vocal against it, because I knew eventually it is going to hurt Iraqis and also the U.S. citizen. But I remember vividly, I was in Chicago, sitting watching the TV, and some of the first images come grainy from the U.S. entering Basra, and some shooting Iraqis, and I knew it's not gonna stop anytime soon, and I knew it is going to alter so many lives as well.
I think in the period leading up to it, I kept thinking, no, they're really not good. You know, I was so sure they were, even though there was the drumbeat, I sort of couldn't believe that they would actually go through with it. So I think I was engaging in a bit of magical thinking for a while. But for me at the time, I was actually already, what was happening in the U.S. at that time, post 9/11, had, you know, with the Patriot Act happening and the Muslim Registration Act, I was already sort of deep into researching and writing about that, because that was already, you know, that all of that was happening around that time. So for me, it's all kind of collapsed in a way, what was happening in here, because I was really interested in what was happening with the detentions and the Muslim registration and what was happening with people, and that was sort of, so sort of domestically was what I was consumed with thinking about, and then.
I mean, I guess I don't have. I mean, it's hard at this point in time to kind of remember exactly what all the sort of all the various things that were kind of going on, and that I guess that I was thinking about. But one of the things I think that does come home, certainly by 2003, you know, after the first couple of years of this sort of imminent, you know, this ongoing kind of fear of what was going to happen and when they were going to invade, and this kind of, there's an anticipation before the invasion of, and certainly kind of a massive sort of resistance campaign in Britain, you know, to stop the war. But was, you know, it was a few months after the invasion in 2003 that, so Babar Ahmed, one of the guys who's extradited, was arrested and beaten up by the police in December, and by the time he gets to the police station, he's sustained 73 injuries, including bleeding in his urine and in his ears. And I remember, you know, some various people that from Muslim communities in Britain that I've spoken to recall this being, it was a particular kind of symbolic moment in the UK, because it really brought home how the war wasn't just going to be happening over there. It was very much kind of coming home, you know, the violence of the militarization of the policing, which has, you know, has always been present, or has been present in Britain, as in here, in certain spaces in Ireland, and you know, in terms of policing black communities. but this kind of militarization of this of police brutality was something that was very much kind of going to mimic the domestic war. Was very much going to kind of be present in the domestic setting as to parallel kind of what was happening elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. And Erin, I guess you are sort of the person on this panel who's has a career that's tasked with being objective. So this might be a little bit different.
So I was pretty young.
Yeah.
I was in 7th grade. Yeah. No, but I mean, honestly, even at that age, my family was a very sort of political liberal family that, always had the newspaper on the table, and, we watched the news every night. And even at that age, it was sort of A, confusion, and B, it was a sentiment that I picked up on, which is very much us versus them type of feeling. And I remember growing up and going through high school and still not having, even as my friends were going off to fight in Iraq, not really having a real understanding of I understood it through an American lens, but I really didn't have an understanding of what people in this country were going through, or what the country, how it was reacting. And it really, that's where I really got interested in my career. I mean, I went to college and studied the Middle East and started taking Arabic, and Iraq was the first country that I sort of started reporting from, and so even at that age, it really had a sort of impact on me, and just trying to understand, get around the sort of American media hype and understanding what was going on, for people who lived in this country, and getting to know those people. Yeah.
And Wafaa, at that point, were you an artist? Did you know that you wanted to be an artist?
In 2003?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually... I'm older than what you think.
I didn't guess.
I'm 52 now, so...
Okay.
No, I was a professor at the Art Institute of Chicago in art, after master's degree and a bachelor degree. Okay. And of course, so it really, Iraq war have shifted my career. I mean, I always did political art, but I think after the death of my brother Haji in 2004, it became intensely personal, and it's like one of the cornerstone of an artistic career, is then to look, and I start thinking there is a duality of existence, and I do have the responsibility as an Iraqi citizen and as an American citizen to try to start a dialogue and not to impose. And I think in before 2000, before shooting Iraqi, I, as an artist, I was imposing my own ideas, and shooting Iraqi have shifted my thinking into, as an artist, I need to bring people and give them a platform for an open narrative, so the project from their own is written by the participant, but not by me as an artist.
And Marina, I'm curious for you too, just how do you connect to that, like your trajectory as an artist who makes political work?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that, I kind of knew what the territory was that I was interested in, but undoubtedly, from 9/11 on, sort of some of the subjects I've taken up have been extremely informed by what it means, what it means to be a young person, what it means to be an immigrant, and in 2 books specifically what it means. In one case, it was sort of undocumented Muslim family, and in this case, so I think I'm always somehow trying to find a way. And I actually was struck with your work when you were saying how it's so personal. There's this way in which I think I'm trying to find a way to take that which is going on around, but to combine it, or to, as I say, to take the documentary of what's going on, but to allow myself to enter through these other characters into the vulnerability of where they are, how, you know, where there's that fusion of the personal and this larger political dynamic, and how they're made vulnerable both within the personal dynamic, but within, of course, this larger stage.
I really love that. There's just like that notion of vulnerability, and it's true from shooting Iraqi on. I start placing myself in this platform when vulnerability it echoes through the participant as well. I think there's an association by using the body, and in that vulnerable state, it brings people into the dialogue and bypassing whatever political rhetoric they may have to prevent them from engaging in a political dialogue.
I want to open it up to the audience just because we're a little short on time. And also for you to ask questions of each other, which I encourage. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask the panel or something they've been thinking about? If not, I have many questions. I'll shoot away.
To ask Ms. Kapoor, how many cases have you documented, more or less, of in your study?
In the book centers around extradition cases and periphery, like related cases. So some cases which I felt I needed to talk about in relation to them. And so I'm not sure how many I cover in the book, maybe about 15 or 10 to 15. There's 9 extradition cases, but there's some additional ones. But the project, Deport, Deprive, Extradite, that I work on has got kind of much bigger now than the book, and we've been charting cases of individuals who have had their passports removed or have been deprived of their citizenship or have been deported on national security grounds, or increasing numbers of women now being arrested and sort of not being charged necessarily, but sort of going through family court, having their children taken away. And so and so now we're talking a lot. I don't know the specific number, but we do have a website which has all the cases on. Yeah, that kind of tries to summarize a number of the cases that we've charted. I've got some pens.
I guess I want to add on to that question. One thing that I think is really interesting about your analysis in the book is that I think, like in the US, we use this canary in the coal mine metaphor a lot. Like, if this is happening to the vulnerable, like, this is what will happen to everyone else. And that, sort of applies to your book, but you also make a point of saying in your book, like, there actually aren't a ton of high-profile terrorism cases. Like, as you just said, there are 9 or something like that. But the effect, they actually do have a major effect on how smaller cases are adjudicated, or even like the stakes for immigrants in general. So I think we can take one more question, but I just wanted to hear, like, I don't know, if you could explain kind of like what the connection is between extradition and what that means for legal protections for like immigrants and Muslims in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, so the extradition cases are, I guess, representative of this thing now that's got much bigger, which is about certainly in terrorism cases where, because ultimately one of the things all of the cases, the extradition cases, have in common is that it's hugely contested over why they go to the US in the first place. There's lots to say that there's no reason why they couldn't be tried in Britain. And a number of the men are actually, the charges against them are dropped in Britain, and the same evidence is used in the US. And this is post spending time in solitary confinement, which, 2 years in pre-trial solitary confinement obviously inhibits your ability to mount a defense. And so extradition actually becomes one way in which individuals can be prosecuted, criminalized and prosecuted, and evade the regular criminal justice system, which I'm not saying, which has tons of problems too, but, without having to kind of openly present evidence and scrutinize evidence and go through a sort of fair due process system. And then these other ways in which we've charted, there's lots of other ways in which this is done as well. So deportation, citizenship deprivation, and so on. I think what these cases, so the ideological work of the war on terror now has largely been done, and some of these cases that I chart from earlier periods, I mean, some of the extradition cases aren't high profile. I've just, some of them don't receive very much press attention. Most of them do, but some of them do because of the resistance campaigns around them. But what they, they help to kind of justify, they help to sort of mobilize popular consensus around these measures, but these measures are happening much more quietly on a much bigger basis for Muslim communities, for Muslims across the board, but then also, as you just said, in terms of, we've looked at, they've looked at some cases of individuals who are facing deportation, not in national security cases, and the same kinds of rationalizations that have been normalized through the security logic are being invoked in regular deportation cases. So, you have both in terms of thinking about citizenship, another sort of example. Citizenship deprivation is the hard end of something that is actually reflects a broader discourse that keeps getting re-invoked in the UK and elsewhere, that citizenship is a privilege, not a right. Citizenship has always been a privilege, but its explicit articulation in that way sort of reflects the way in which citizenship has become much more precarious as a status. So we have large numbers of individuals who have permanent residency, who apply for citizenship, who are being refused citizenship on the grounds of having bad character. And it's having bad character has become the principal reason why individuals who are denied citizenship are being denied. And it's a kind of amorphous category, it allows multiple reasons. There are multiple reasons why it can be categorized as having bad character, which can be quite petty, but it kind of reflects. So the what's happening to these guys is kind of the harder end of much more of measures that are being implemented much more broadly. So we have secret justice being used in other courts, not just in terrorism cases. The ways of testing out, and it's the same that often happens with sort of asylum deportation cases. Things are tested out on refugees, on asylum seekers in immigration detention that then become used, altered slightly. I'm not saying it's to the same extent, but the mechanisms are kind of tested out and sort of enforced or become kind of normalized, in the welfare system.
Which kind of not that I don't think most people think what Trump is doing is normal, but it does, makes his work easier. Yeah. I want to see if there's another question from the audience.
Hi, Wafaa, how are you? I'm lucky I had a chance to exhibit Waffle at Asian American Art Center before you got into Shura, Iraqi. And I remember quite vividly the painting that we exhibited of yours. You had this temple on your back, and I believe it was a self-portrait. And it was in such anguish. I mean, the way you painted very realistically, such anguish you had. And then, it was a few months later, a year later, I heard you were doing this incredible thing, incredible exhibition, and it was just so remarkable, your transformation from being so keyed up to trying to do something. You wanted to do something, and you came upon this idea, which was this totally different thing. But the point I want to make is that you are now saying that the anguish that you felt, your transformation after you completed 31 days of doing this, you learned, you figured out that it wasn't your emotion that you wanted to give a platform to, but all those people who shot you, who tried to shoot you, 20,000 people in one day, you gave them a platform to voice their narrative. And many of us as artists, we're not there yet. We're not doing that. We're not being able to take our Asian American perspective and make it, transform it to something that enables all these other people from so many other places where they're thinking and how that affects them. If you remember what you did with those paintings that we exhibited, and somehow, what is that transformation for us? Take us through, what is that?
Well, first I wanted to thank you, and I want to thank you for all your work you have done for so many years. It was 2004, and I start thinking about what can I do as an artist, and honestly, no inspiration for the next 3 years that follow, until I encounter a very simple interview with an American soldier on TV, and it was on Channel 7. I was in Chicago, and I was shocked by how the soldier who sent in these drones and a drop and bomb, there is no connection at all. And I remember calling my gallerist, which I was scheduled to do a different show, and I said, I do have a project, and the project considering strongly to use a local language and filter through the culture. I wanted to use the paintball gun, which is an American. I wanted to bypass the galleries and its politics. And I wanted to enter people's homes, which is using the internet. And then lastly, I want to handle the control to the people. And it's very open narrative. Beside shooting me, they were chatting with each other. 3,000 pages of chat room. We people come to the project from 128 countries with 80 million hits on the website. This is one in 1 month. And I think what really made it successful, a few things. One, I was dealing with my own demons. I lost my brother, 2004. 2 months later, I lost my father because he was grieving over the loss of his son. And I was in denial entirely about what happened to the family, was completely destroyed. And I think I stayed in denial until throughout the project, until day 10, when the gun becomes silent because so many people start visiting and shooting, and it broke down because of the traffic. At that moment, I broke down as well in tears, sobbing, and I thought it's the end of the project, but it was the start of my transformation, because I think that was the moment I left denial and entered the second stage of grieving. And once I think that happened, I start understand my role as an artist much better. And I think at the beginning I was so angry at people who were shooting me, until a friend of mine alerted me saying, without the shooters, there is no project. So I understood. I stepped back and let people in the crowd monitor and inform each other. And I think that's why the book project, which I started with Carrie was a Washington Post reporter, and who came to report on me, and within 2 hours she came with an amazing article, literally in 2 hours. And we stayed friends, and right away after I finished the project, I thought it's not the end of it, it's really the beginning of a bigger journey. And I wrote everything happened. I have more than 40 hours of video, and Kerry and I went into, after the city light asked us to do the project, we locked ourselves in for months. And I always say this is like, it was Diet Coke and Jim Beam and riding, that's it. And Kerry and I just like back and forth. And I don't think we left the place until a few months later. We handed the manuscript to City Light. To me, it's just like the work continue of what it started with shooting Iraqi.
Maybe we'll just end on a note of kind of what projects you're working on now. And then unfortunately, I think we're out of time, but
Yeah.
we will have books in the back
Just
end. Everyone
quickly, I'm continue to work on a project called 168 Hours and 1 Second, which you contributed some books to it. It's the restocking of the College of Fine Art Library in 2003. The college lost their entire stocking, just like they lost 70,000 books. So in 2 years ago, I started this collective project, participatory one, when I give away one white book, and in exchange I receive another book. And the title come from just like how Iraq culture keep losing to invaders and rebuild. The 60 hours, 160 hours reflect means it came from a story that's been told as kids. That's the Mongolian invaded Iraq, and for them to cross the river, they build a bridge out of the books and the holding of libraries, and the Tigris River, Dijla, run blue for 7 days, which is 168 hours. So the project started with all white books drained out of knowledge, and through that exchange with people, and I'm very happy to say we just deliver 1,700 books. And I give the resources to the student and the faculty to remodel the interior of the library. And it's a first step in, and hopefully what it would be the ushering to a new Iraq and rebuilding of that country.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thanks everyone for sharing your work, and thanks for spending time with it. I think that's a good note to end on.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Sophia,
you.
and thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.